I just wanted you guys to see that picture of Mark Lamont Hill again, because I know there's a lot of people on here that probably think it's me. It's not me. It's Mark Lamont Hill. We all don't look alike. We're going to have a good show tonight. I make these intro videos, and I put them up. Now I'm getting a little better at putting them up before the show. I try to do it a day before. Sorry. But this one, I did not know the show was going to be this interesting for people, that the comments on the video would start rolling in, even comments in the Patreon, comments on Facebook. So I'm getting myself ready. We are moderatorless now, so I'm getting myself ready for a very fun and spicy chat. I wish I was live for the pre-show discussion, which was kind of off the hook with our guest and Pascal, who are our old friends. So let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog, who is ready today. He is definitely ready. He pitched this show probably about a month ago, and I don't even think he knew how spicy this was about to get. Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
I was enjoying the conversation you brothers were having before we went on air.
You look like you liked it. You look like you wanted to sit down and have, a nice cool beverage.
I went and got a glass of water. I sat back and listened. I know how to shut up. I don't always have to interject if I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Before we bring on our guest, let's get you guys ready for the show today with this video. And I do want to say, the first clip in this video, I had no idea who this person was. I was literally just looking up people that weren't Mark Lamont Hill talking about critical race theory. This person came up. I have no idea who she is still. I didn't find her jokes funny, but I just want you to know that. I don't want people to think that I'm a fan of this person. Enjoy.
In the past few weeks, several state legislatures have introduced bills banning critical race theory. They've done it in Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and a bunch of other states where you can buy Confederate flags at gas stations. But the thing is, while some Americans are furious about critical race theory, a lot of people don't even know what it is. And I don't blame them. Critical race theory sounds like the subtitle of a book called Mario Kart for Dummies. First, I'm going to pick up speed, then I'm going to throw some nanas, then I'm going to get some coins, and that is my critical race theory. Now, in order to talk about critical race theory, we're going to start with something called the 1619 Project. The 1619 Project is an extraordinary Pulitzer Prize-winning work of journalism conceived of by a reporter named Nicole Hannah-Jones. It was released to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the arrival of enslaved Africans in the colonies that would become America. That's right. The first anniversary is paper, the 5th is wood, and the 400th is well-researched and award-winning journalism.
Many liberals and progressives have been circling the wagons defending critical race theory as part of a new culture war. The desire to defend these ideas stem from the reactionary right wing using critical race theory as the new boogeyman that is harming the narrative of American exceptionalism conservatives so desperately cling to. In this episode, we will discuss the assertions of critical race theory and inquire, do these theories challenge capitalism and wealth hierarchies? Or is this simply a plea for more liberal anti-racism that seeks to diversify the ruling class as the overall pie shrinks for the rest of the nation? This is revolution.
Critical race theory begins from the assumption that racism occurs in all interactions. To see how this works, consider this thought experiment. Imagine you own a shop and two customers enter at the same time, one white and one black. Who do you help first? If you help the black person first, critical race theory would say you did so because you don't trust black people to be left alone in your store. That's racist. If you help the white person first instead, critical race theory would say you did so because you think blacks are second-class citizens. That's racist too.
I'm here today to talk about those things that unite us as Americans, and I'm here to talk about those things that divide us. I'm worried that President Biden is nominating for federal office individuals who do not share a view of America as a good and decent place, who do not believe that the history of this nation is worth celebrating, nominating instead people who believe that this is a country founded in racism and shot through with corruption. Many of these nominees are partisans of a viewpoint that goes by different names, but shares several features in common. A view that America is a systemically racist place and systemically unjust. A view of America as corrupt. A view of American society as one that needs to be deconstructed, that needs to be pulled apart, torn down, and then rebuilt in a fundamentally different way. Now, this broad ideology has become known in public as critical race theory.
And that was your very own Josh Hawley. There you go, America. Our guest, Paul C. Mocombe, is a Haitian philosopher and sociologist. He currently works as a professor of philosophy and sociology at West Virginia State University. Paul does research in sociological theory, social theory, Haitian studies, and social and political philosophy. Please welcome, coming all the way live from West Virginia, Paul Mocombe.
Thanks for having me, Jason Pascal, but I'm actually in Florida right now.
Oh, word.
He has a dual appointment. Okay. Paul Mocombe, scholar, intellectual extraordinaire. My man, my friend. For the audience who does not know, I have known Paul for several years now, probably about 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. We've actually appeared on a few panels together. One on Pan-Africanism, and we used to do a panel every year during the anniversary of Haitian Flag Day, and we haven't done that stuff, particularly in the age of COVID. And him and another Haitian scholar who was a Dr. Lucien Joseph, together we used to call ourselves the Three Musketeers because we kind of, worked off each other and did some presentations and things of that nature. So for us to understand why Paul is here, Paul wrote an article a few years ago that Jason's probably going to share with the chat and post against critical race theory. And Paul, for those who do not know, Paul, you can intercede and correct me if you think I miscategorized your thought. Paul is an orthodox structural Marxist. Now, let me make this clear. I use Marxism as a economic and social critique of capitalism, but as Paul knows, I am not an orthodox structural Marxist. Marxism for me is a tool. It is not an ideology that I am an orthodox ideological adherent to. Paul, who I respect greatly, and I find his insights, I have learned much from him, is an orthodox structural Marxist. So Paul's...
Real quick correction, Pascal. I was trained in graduate school as both a phenomenologist as well as a structural Marxist from a brilliant feminist by the name of Teresa Brennan. So that's where the structural Marxism come from. Okay. Yes.
So do you let people know that you're a trained Marxist, much like coterie? Yes.
A phenomenologist and a structural Marxist. At every conference, I let them know, yes, I'm trained. But that's about it.
So Paul's got an analysis and a critique of critical race theory that comes from his left Marxist analysis. But before we get into what Paul is saying about critical race theory, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I'm not unknown to critical race theory because I took classes on critical race theory when I was in law school. Critical race theory, which started as a legal academic study, a paradigm, started largely at Harvard Law School under Derek Bell and a whole coterie of other academics, was something that was in vogue when I was in law school in the early 90s. I remember vividly reading Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, my first year of law school, and taking seminars on the ideas and the philosophies that come out of critical race theory. Wasn't that much of a fan of it then, but my position on it now is even further. Paul, I would like you to form my position on what I understand of critical race theory is that critical race theory is a legal school of thought that is rooted in exposing the historical functionality of the American legal system as a way in which race is the primary motivating factor behind the way in which law and its functionality and utility is practiced in American society. This is an academic discipline that is rooted in the American legal system in its origin. It had nothing to do with general American history. It had nothing to do with whiteness studies. It had nothing to do with Robin DiAngelo. It was about an analysis of the American legal history rooted in arguing that, if not the primary, one of the primary motivating factors behind legal development of American law was the subjugation of Black people. Now,
it is a form of radical liberalism.
I would agree with you there. Now, in terms of the trajectory of where this comes from, I saw a recent podcast, I'm not going to name their names, where they tried to make the argument that critical race theory has Marxist origins. I think I sent you a text of that podcast.
Yes.
I think Paul will agree. I think that's fundamentally incorrect. Derek Bell himself, one of the founders of critical race theory, said he had no use for Marxism. As a matter of fact, if you read one of the most extensive compendiums of the works of critical race theory, I mean, thousands of pages, they cite or mention Marx maybe one or two times at best. The main reason why people are arguing that critical race theory has Marxist origins is because they're trying to equate critical race theory with the phenomenon of critical studies or critical scholarship that comes out of what was known as the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School were Marxist intellectuals who left Germany during the rise of the Nazi Holocaust and came to the United States. These are people like Theodore Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, and gentlemen of that like, who, because they were seeing how America, during the rise of the New Deal, and how the working class was being de-radicalized because of the largesse of the New Deal, they became very, very cynical, I would argue, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, on the revolutionary capacity of Marxism in the West post-World War II, and developed an analysis rooted in a critical critique of how American and Western capitalism was socializing working class Americans and turning them into things like one-dimensional people. One of the more important analysis of the Frankfurt School comes through analysis of popular culture, analysis of film, of media. So the Frankfurt School was rooted in a critical Marxist analysis of the way in which capitalism, post-World War II, post-New Deal, had become such a phenomenon of critical realism that it had neutralized the revolutionary capacity of the working class. Am I correct or incorrect, Paul?
You're right. What would happen is there two arms would emerge out of critical race theory. As you point out, there's that critical legal studies component with people like Derek Bell, et cetera, coming out of the Harvard School. And then you would get much later on people like Cornel West, Paul Gilroy, who would attempt to marry the negative dialectic of the Frankfurt School into a critique of Western institutions. Now, so they moved away from the dialectical component, the Marxist.
Can you explain before? Okay. Let's explain terms. Explain what the Frankfurt School negative dialectic was.
Okay, negative dialectic, a title by the same name, written by Theodore Adorno. It's a form of identitarian logic in philosophy. And what negative dialectic argues is that, because remember, the Frankfurt School, they're trying to understand the origins of fascism that would emerge during the World War II and after. So they wanted to understand the dynamics, what led to the rise of Hitler and others, the Soviet Union as well. So you would have works like Herbert Marcuse's One Dimensional Man, as well as his Soviet Marxism. You would get works like Theodore Adorno's Negative Dialectic. And there's also a critique of the Enlightenment project itself, because what they realize is reason itself became a form, whereas reason during the Enlightenment was a form of progress leading us to freedom. In the end, what happened was the Enlightenment project, that with its emphasis on reason, came in turn to oppress individuals, because reason became reified, as George Lukács argues in his work. So how do we fight that? How do we fight against reason itself becoming oppressive? And Adorno came up with this notion called this concept of negative dialectic, where we must constantly think against the very system we're fighting in. And you can see how that would marry so nicely with this critique of institutions and critiques of social structure that we would find in critical race theory. Because by arguing in negative dialectic that one must always constantly fight against the reification of systems and institutions and social structure, there's an easy marriage between that and the notion in critical race theory that the American institutions themselves were constituted, when they were constituted, were based on race and racism. So it was easy for people like Cornell and Paul Gilroy to marry this, but as Pascal points out, that is not the initial initiative of critical race theory, the critical race theory that would emerge out of critical legal studies, which is more of a radical form of liberalism, where the emphasis is on demystifying the racial component of these laws for a colorblind. And even then, even when in critical legal studies, when they point out the fact that a colorblind law as it is written in praxis, it is not colorblind. So that was the emphasis of critical legal studies. So this whole notion of demystifying the racial component of the laws and the institutions of America, the idea was, in doing so, you would lead to greater progress for Blacks and more integration of Black people into the society. But the fact that reason itself, as Adorno points out in the negative dialectics, cannot do that unless you are constantly thinking about or thinking against the very institutions by which we recursively reorganize and reproduce our being in the world. So that was the negative dialectical component that many left-leaning Marxists like Cornel West tried to implement in critical race theory.
This is very important. So let's recap. Negative dialectics, which was a part of the Frankfurt School critical studies component, which is about realizing that structures that exist in a society are something that you must constantly challenge, or they will reify themselves in an oppressive. and become oppressive.
Yes.
Right. Understanding that the Frankfurt School scholars were Marxists, we would also understand that part of that dialectic is about challenging the hierarchy of capital, right? And as you said, part of the argument of the negative dialectics out of the Frankfurt School is that you can never stop fighting those hierarchies.
Yes, absolutely.
Those hierarchies should be consistently, you know what I'm saying? We could argue maybe like some Trotsky say the permanent revolution.
Exactly.
Which is a very famous belief of the Trotskyists. But you said something very important. The critical legal studies component that comes out of Derek Bell makes the argument that the negative dialectics, in other words, fighting the structures, should be done until what? Black people are able to be integrated into the system and function in the system equally as everyone else, particularly
per the law.
Which
then is colorblind.
Yes. And people will ask, well, what's wrong with that? Because what happens at that point, you take away the component that challenges the hierarchy of capitalism. And because you make the hierarchy exclusively racialized, it assumes that democratizing a capitalist economic system and increasing Black participation means that capitalism is going to allow all Blacks to become integrated into the system, when what we have learned in the history of the 50-year counter-revolution, the only thing that happens when you try to integrate into capitalism is that it integrates a Black elite tier, and it further cannibalizes into poverty the Black poor and what are considered the working poor or the Black underclass.
Yes, the thing is, we're okay with the structural differentiation that emerges within capitalist relations of production. If you understand American society, and this is why many scholars will argue it is the racial component that prevented the class revolution that emerged in Europe, which is why it was easy for this 50-year counter revolution to emerge, because in American society, it is acceptable. We attribute your poverty to a lack of effort. So the ideology by which we constitute American society is okay with the structural differentiation that emerges out of capitalist relations of production. But we're not okay post 1954. We're no longer okay with the organization of race or organizing around race and racial segregation. Even your rightist right person on the right will argue, yes, I'm against organizing our society about race, but we're not against organizing the society around class differentiation. And this is, I think, is fundamental to understanding the American, the constitution of the American relations of production. Even Black people are okay with class structural differentiation to some extent, because we will attribute your poverty to your lack of effort, to your cultural deficiencies, etc., as Thomas Sowell and many conservative Black economists have made the argument for.
Pound cake speech.
So we're okay with that, but post 1954, we're not okay with racial. And the thing with critical legal studies and the critical legal studies component of critical race theory is the fact that they're speaking about not individual racism and individual prejudices. They're speaking about institutional racism and structural racism as opposed to individual racism. The law cannot adjudicate individual racism, but according to critical legal studies, the law can adjudicate institutional and structural racism, and that's what the legal side of critical race theory is promoting. Now, the Cornell West negative dialectical component is what they're trying to do is use to make that argument not only to legislate against individual racism, but also institutional and cultural racism as well.
But again, this is the thing. Because the differentiation between the Frankfurt School, who uses negative dialectics, or the argument that you must consistently fight against structures in a society because they will reify oppression, is that because they were Marxists, they realized the crux of that oppression is economic hierarchy. And as a result, that you've got to challenge capitalism. But when we get to the negative dialectics of critical legal studies and even the critical dialectics of critical race studies, the effect is to challenge the hierarchies until you neutralize racial oppression.
Yes.
Okay, and this is the thing.
And that means
if you neutralize racial oppression, right, in a capitalist hierarchy, then literally follow the logic here, people.
No, you remain with
listen, what you can say is that there are 14% of the population that is white, that is black. 60 some odd plus are white, and the rest are other ethnic. As long as 14% of black people are in the ruling class, and the proper percentage of white people are in the ruling class, according to their number, and Latinos and Asians, as long as that percentage is in the ruling class, since the racial stigmatization is gone, everyone else, white, black, or otherwise, as long as they're represented by percentage, can be slaves, and America is great.
No, I would agree. And the other component, and there's two.
Am I correct? Or
yes, no, you're absolutely right. There's two problems that I find with critical race theory. The first problem is the critical race theory is problematic for me. Number one, I don't believe it's critical enough. That's one. The second problem that I have with critical race theory is the fact that if you, and this is an attack on the Cornell West, the negative dialectical side of critical race theory. If you remember, the Frankfurt School are looking at how the institutions, and here Althusser's work, Louis Althusser's work is so important. And he has a structural Marxist reading of Capital and of Marx as well, more of a Hegelian reading of Marx. The institutions themselves, and this is what structural Marxism argues, the institutions themselves are in place to reproduce the relations of production. So Mark Lamont Hill is wrong, and the problem with Mark Lamont Hill, he conflates the structural Marxism of Althusser with the structuralism that comes out of linguistics. That's why I hate when you have intellectuals and during media stuff, because they tend to speak too fast. Marx is saying there is a one-to-one relationship between the economic base and the ideological superstructure. This is why the reification of the ideological superstructure, the reification of the institutions, whether it is the law, your police force, how we organize our streets, all of these are what Althusser called ideological state apparatuses. They are in place to reproduce the social relations of production. So if critical race theory is attacking the institutions solely on racial ground, now there's another component of critical race theory that tries to make the Kimberly Crenshaw intersectional argument, and I think that's foolishness as well. But if their attack is on the institutions from a racial standpoint, you pose no threat to the forces and relations of production, because it is the institutions simply replace the forces of the relations of production. So how you attacking the lack of black, or the impact of the institutions on preventing? Remember, if you look at it clearly, critical race theory is arguing that blacks cannot participate in the social structure because the institutions were put in place to prevent them from participating in the social structure. So if your attack is on the institutions that are preventing blacks from participating in the social structure, once you institutionalize color blindness, what happens? And blacks are able to participate in the society. Are you then saying now we have a fair and equitable society, and now nothing matters. And this is the brilliant work of Nancy Fraser, who wrote Justice Interruptus. It piggybacks on what you said, this 50-year counter-revolution, because what have Black people been fighting for since Brown versus the Board of Education? It's integration, equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution. Now, how does that undermine the relations of production? It doesn't.
It just gives you bigger fat back and biscuits and a nicer house in a suburban neighborhood.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you guys see the super chat that I got on the screen right now from our brother Jeremy that actually helps us out with?
Can the professor talk about what bits of Althusser we should hang on to and which bits we can safely cast away, if any?
Oh, excellent question. For me personally, I hold on to Althusser's essay. His reading of Marx is brilliant. I believe that his Hegelian reading of Marx, and the title of his book is Reading of Marx as well, is brilliant. I believe his critique of Marx, and there is a distinction that is drawn in Marxist circles between the younger Marx and the older Marx, and he argues that many scholars are just reading the older Marx into the younger version, but we have to see Marx as progressively evolving his views. That's A. And his other essay, which is, I think, is undervalued, is ideology and ideological state apparatuses. I think that is one of the most brilliant essays that Althusser has ever produced. And then he actually draws, he outlines how every institution is in place to recursively reproduce the social relations of production. That's what makes the essay brilliant. And remember, Althusser is simply building off, and here Mark Lamont Hill is correct. He is building off the linguistics of Saussure, but however, he's just replacing structural linguistics with relations of production. And he's building off the work of the French scholar. Well, he studied the French, but he's not French. Alexander Kojève, who takes a Hegelian turn to Marxism, and that's what Althusser is doing as well. He's taking a Hegelian turn. He's actually saying, no, we need to focus, and this is what the Frankfurt School do as well. We need to start focusing. I know this, Pascal and I will disagree here. Pascal is constantly making a reference to materialist relations. We need to focus on materialist relations and stop focusing on race, blah, blah, blah. But what the Frankfurt School and Althusser, what they're saying is no, there is no way we can experience material reality anymore, because material reality has been basically the institutions have replaced the material reality. So we no longer have any direct contact with the material environment. What we have are contacts with the ideas of institutions.
In other words, we're so immersed in the ideological superstructure that we've achieved what is called capitalist realism.
And that's why Theodore Adorno argues that the biggest threat to humanity is the cultural industry. Walt Disney was the biggest threat to
this is my favorite.
And you don't understand, Pascal was talking about, we were on a show earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
The pop culture, I use pop culture as a way to kind of explain stuff to people.
Mm-hmm.
Marx, even crime bills. We're always using pop culture as a way to explain it. For example, used RoboCop as a way to explain neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Pascal hates pop culture. We were on a show. He literally said what you're saying. He literally said that verbatim. It's almost as if you guys might be friends and talk.
Because the culture industry analysis of the Frankfurt School, as Paul knows, he's read my work, is a very important part of my pop culture critiques, particularly the piece I wrote on Kanye West and the piece I wrote on Clarence Avant, because I use, and obviously, I was influenced a lot by Adolph Reed because he started doing this, using how Black popular culture is used by the culture industry, not only to reify racial subjugation, but racial subjugation within the 50-year counter-revolution and the rise of neoliberalism. And that's one of the reasons why I am a fan of the Frankfurt School, is because of its analysis of the culture industry, which I think is one of its most valuable contributions. The right wing hates the Frankfurt School. They call it, the cultural Marxism.
Absolutely, and they would.
So, and they would, because what it does is that it demonstrates all of the internal bankruptcy of all of the institutions at the height of capitalist development, which is during the New Deal and afterwards from the 50s into the 60s, and shows how. And one of the reasons why morons like Jordan Peterson hate the quote-unquote cultural Marxists is because the corrosion of American society caused by neoliberalism has demonstrated itself and it's fallen on itself. And they tried to use the phenomenon that actually predicted this to blame it for the actual problem, when in reality, the problem is rooted in the political economy and capitalism's always need to cannibalize itself regularly, i.e. what happened in 2008 with the Great Recession and the economic crash.
And what we see is it's actually paradoxical, because on the one hand you have the left power elites, and by left I mean your political left, your democratic left in this country, who actually utilize the cultural industry to reproduce capitalist relations of production, and then you have the right who are fighting it because it, as you clearly stated, it's eroding traditional American values.
Say it again for the people in the back who might think they're smoking crack. Say it again. Say it again.
And it's interesting because right after grad school, I wrote a book called The African Americanization of the Black Diaspora. And what I argue is that what's happening throughout the Black diaspora is that the Black power elites, and in this I include your rappers, your artists, your athletes, etc., they have become the bearers of ideological and linguistic domination in the diaspora. So when you travel throughout Africa, when you travel throughout, it's funny, I was finishing the book when I was in St. Lucia, and St. Lucia it used to be a French colony, and then the English took it over, etc. And throughout the country, you see a young of Creole speaking Black kids wearing Tupac shirts, Biggie. They're riding in low riders, listening to gangster rap, and had no clue what they were saying. So what I argue in that book was that the Black power elites, meaning athletes, rappers, have become the bearers of ideological and linguistic domination in neoliberal capitalism, and they are used as such by by finance capital.
So let's break this down again. What you are saying is that the cultural production of Black popular culture in the 50-year counter-revolution, particularly with the rise of urban hip-hop, is used as an exporter
to bourgeois Blacks
of capitalist production values and socialization to the African diaspora, and to inculcate them in the economic aspirations of basically Black capitalism via popular culture.
Absolutely. So that makes the Frankfurt School were on point when they critiqued the cultural industry, because in post-industrial capitalism, it becomes the means of embourgeoisement, as Althusser would say.
And what becomes particularly fascinating and important for those who have not read my book, my book is coming, my piece on Clarence Savat and the ruling class use of Black popular culture.
There's a video essay coming on that. Just hold your
right. What is particularly fascinating is that the move to mass financialization of Black popular culture starts off with the Kerner Commission report that demands that this is to be done as a means of neutralizing the urban rebellion happening all over the United States from 1967 to 1971. We have 300 urban rebellions. In 1968, I believe, Johnson issues out the Kerner Commission report. And in the new media section of the Kerner Commission report, basically the solution that is proposed is flood television and interest in music and everything with Black images, Black popular culture, Black music, and there is a citation in that segment where they're literally signifying the creation of a TV show like Good Times. We must have TV shows that focus on the urban poverty of the day. If Jason can link to that piece, I would love it. But the larger point of the matter is that what is particularly nefarious about the way in which after these urban rebellions between 67 to 71, you start seeing Soul Train, Good Times, hyper hi-fi sound Black soul music. You notice all of a sudden we get flooded with all this deep soul, dance, disco. All of this popular cultural production becomes infused at a time in which the economy is crashing in the 70s, but yet cultural production of Black popular culture is inundated in mass marketization. Why? To demobilize Black radicalism.
Absolutely. And it's funny. I have a paradoxical relationship with the Cosby Show, because on the one hand, the Cosby Show, and here I disagree with Michael Eric Dyson and his critique of Bill Cosby. But on the one hand, the Cosby Show undermined that, and at the beginning, it undermined that.
I disagree with you there. Yeah, remember, I was
similar to this the other day on the phone.
You know why? Because I was growing up in New York. When does the Cosby? First of all, I want to say I'm a little older than you, Paul. So
yes,
Black here. The Cosby Show comes out when I'm in high school in New York City. Mm-hmm. All right. The Cosby Show is a television program, for those who are not familiar, probably few, about an upper middle class elite Black family. Husband's a lawyer, husband's a doctor, wife is a lawyer, who live in a nice brownstone in Brooklyn in New York City, starting in 1983 or 84, going on to the early 90s, in which they are living in Shangri-La. There's no discussion about racism. The kids are wonderful.
There's a racism show.
Everything's lovely, lovely, lovely. This is going on during Yusef Hawkins. This is going to Bernard Getz. This is going to the mayoralty of Ed Koch, one of the most notoriously racist mayors in the modern history of New York City, where New York was literally a racial fire pit for Black and brown people. And all of a sudden, the only mainstream television show you have about Black life in America during the Reagan Revolution of reactionary right is Negroes living on in Shangri-La, talking about we love jazz. And honey, I'm home.
Absolutely, brother.
Counter-revolutionary.
Pascal's just mad because him and his family was doing that lip sync shit.
But paradoxically, Pascal, it undermined what the cultural industry was attempting to do at the time, though. And this is what you have to look at it. And this is why I have a paradoxical relationship with it. Because in Bill Cosby attempting to display this, he was undermining this flooding of underclass culture as the bearer of ideological and linguistic domination in America. And remember, simultaneously, what you have to realize is you start to see around the Cosby Show this rise of Afrocentric culture, because one of the critiques of Bill Cosby was Malifi Asante. He had a big critique against Bill Cosby because Bill was out there saying Shanae is not an African name. You see what I'm saying? So we have to, and this is why I was saying I have a paradoxical relationship with the Cosby Show, because on the one hand, it was undermining what the left, the neoliberal left, was trying to do with Black underclass culture, hip hop culture. Now, brother, hip hop culture is the neoliberal project. It is avant-garde. You are considered avant-garde, a Black avant-garde. If you're saying, look at Jay-Z. Jay-Z is Black avant-garde, brother. Whereas, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, listen, man. As someone who grew up in New York City and watched the birth of hip hop culture was a very effective manifestation and manipulation by the capitalist neoliberal cultural industry to neutralize all forms of Black musical cultural production. And what made hip hop particularly fascinating, right, is that it's the first form of Black culture, musical production musical production where the cultural component almost becomes more important than the musical component.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. You're absolutely right. And it is that cultural component early on that, later on that they would attack. Remember, there's two facets that would take place out of hip hop. There was that gangster rap avenue that would just overtake hip hop.
Right. To be fair, because in my era, in my youth, and again, right, I'm a teenager of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is overplayed, but there was a kind of Afrocentric romanticism, kind of black nationalist fetishism in certain segments of hip hop. You had KRS-One, you have X-Clan, you have Poor Righteous Teachers,
absolutely.
You have even the brothers who come out of the 5%ers, the 5% Nation of Islam. So, we shouldn't generalize and say all of it was rooted in kind of degenerate, kind of like this cocaine culture.
No, what we have to emphasize,
that turn starts with the advent, kind of like an NWA, and particularly with the Chronic. With the Chronic that comes out in '91, and then we start to when West Coast. No hate to my West Coast brothers, but the gangsterization of the music becomes exacerbated. And basically what happens is that both coasts end up competing each other for replicating this gangsterization.
No, and it became institutionalized as well.
It has to do with, like, let's just be honest about, like, just sales. And if you really want to talk about the beginning of gangster rap music, that shit starts in Philadelphia.
Starts in New York with PS2, PS kicking that thing.
My brother's from Philly.
That's right. That's right.
And then it takes off with PSK. And also keep in mind, Hollywood is where movies are made. You get the breaking movies. I think there was like a rapping movie made out here. And then Ice-T takes off with 6 in the Morning, and you have NWA, coming on his coattails. Because also, to your point about being avant-garde, it was shocking.
Yes.
We have to be honest about shock music in the age of Reagan.
Yes, absolutely.
And Torrey Reed makes a great analysis. It was cheap to produce.
Hella.
You didn't have to pay a band.
No.
If you guys knew some of the stories I've heard about rap budgets when these guys were signing with major labels like Elektra going like, we don't know how much money you need because we produce Anita Baker. And that's like a $2 million record just recording it. And you fools just need a DJ and a microphone. We don't know that all you need is a $50,000 in a dream. So like the budgets those dudes were getting are on another level with the exposure. And then also we're not talking about, I don't know how deep you guys want to go down this rabbit hole, like who writes the articles that were saying that this was the next great thing. Torrey's take on NWA, he says he feels like it was a D.W. Griffith idea. I necessarily don't feel that bad about it, but I see what he means.
But you know what, Pascal? The fundamental point for me is, why is there a need to hold on? If you have colorblind legislation, correct? Can we make the argument, for argument's sake, can we make the argument, if you look at the Constitution, if you look at the law on its face today, you can make the argument that we have colorblind legislation compared to, let's say, prior to Brown versus the Board of Education. If we can make the argument that we have colorblind legislation, why are these black elites fighting so hard for critical race theory? There's no need for it.
Stop. They didn't start fighting until the age of Obama.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the main things that happens in the 50-year kind of revolution is that black movement politics falls asleep.
And we get the post-racial, quote unquote, post-racial president like Obama.
And Jason, if you can find that magazine, that Ebony magazine, people talking about, oh, Reagan was horrible. August 1987 Ebony magazine, a black publication, has a picture of a black man in a business suit and a black woman in a business suit, the new black middle class. Mm-hmm. Are you in or are you out? You're going to tell me that black people were not celebrating the rise of the black middle class during the Reagan years? Really?
True story. When Obama is running for the first term, I'm teaching at Bethune-Cookman University at the time. And do you know, brother, they canceled classes and they took the students in bus loads to go vote. And prior to that, they had convocation in which the president of the university at the time said, and I quote, "We all know who we're going in there to vote for." They canceled my class to bus the students to go vote. And brother, I took a stand. I was like, no, I disagree with what's going on. But, this was the move for them. This was post-racial. And race, think about it.
Man, you see, I don't know if you saw the post. I said, listen, man, one of the cruelest political tricks the ruling class in this country ever did to black people in America was the manufacture of the Obama presidency, man.
Absolutely. But you can't talk about that in Black America, brother.
It's right middle class.
Yeah. You walk into churches now. It used to be MLK and white Jesus. Now we have MLK, white Jesus, and Obama. So it's
I think that there's a generation. I think that I'm more optimistic in the numbers of particularly under 40 black people. Under 40 black people realize that Obama gave black folk a raw deal, and under 40 black people realize it. And there are some black folk who will start. Listen, as much as we may find some, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to go into them. Some of these pseudo movement online phenomenon hashtag movements that we have today, problematic and pseudo movements. Mm-hmm. Many of them, one thing that's consistent, they all realize that Obama was a failure for black people.
No, absolutely. And the sad thing is, think about it.
I would argue the only reason we have those movements, whether they be Black Lives Matter, ADOS, FBA, whatever they are, is because Obama was a failure for black people.
I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. And look how, black folk undermined the Bernie Sanders movement. With the help of the Obamas, of course.
Well, again, as we have said before, and I have said before, the most threatening thing to the American ruling class in America today is not the Congressional Black Caucus.
No, absolutely not.
It's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, I'm not saying she's a threat to the ruling class. What they perceive as more problematic is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Absolutely.
Not because she's all challenged to the state of the ruling class. She's not. No. I'm not singing her praises at all. What I'm saying is that the realization of the possibility of having a socialist politics in name only, surrounded by young, charismatic people in America that people are behind, is one of the main reasons why you find Jamie Dimon saying, we got to fight the racial wealth gap, but won't talk about Medicare for all or federal jobs guarantee. Because Jamie Dimon realizes that as long as he pushes what Preston Smith called racial democracy, which will always lead to what? More fat back and biscuits inclusion for the black elite, whether it's reparations or anything else. He knows that black folk, particularly the majority of educated black folk, are not going to do the thing that is the greatest fear to the ruling class. They're not going to join people like Ocasio-Cortez and say, we demand a public goods form of government.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with you. I would agree with you on that point as well. She is the... And I was surprised. Truth be told, I was surprised about the whole Bernie Sanders. And I'm pessimistic, and that's the problem with structural Marxism. Structural Marxism makes you a pessimistic scholar.
Well, listen, we shouldn't fetishize Sanders. Sanders had a message that was important. He ended up being a coward and surrendering to the Democratic Party.
But the problem is, and this is a critique once again. If Jordan Peterson wants to critique the Frankfurt School, this is a legitimate critique. Is how do you explain within Frankfurt School discourse? How do you explain the rise of a Bernie Sanders campaign in American society? That was shocking to me, and I think it's the economic collapse that gave us a rise of.
Of course, this is all. Come on, man. As a dialectical materialist, you got to know that the contradictions of capitalism and the material realities of the 2008 crash is what set this all in motion. Come on, man. You think all these kids right now with their Ivy League degrees would have T-shirts on with pictures of Che Guevara? If we didn't have the 2008 crash, they will be counting their bond holdings right now, applying for jobs at Goldman Sachs. Come on,
absolutely, brother.
Bitcoin.
Oh,
investing in Bitcoin. Jesus, investing in Bitcoin.
No, I would agree with you on that, but it's problematic. I think as an analytical tool, critical race theory, number one, I don't think it's viable in contemporary time.
We got. Paul, do you have time to go into the patrons only section?
How long is that, brother?
As long as you can stay with us, brother.
Sure, no problem. Because remember, I'm coming back from New York for my uncle's funeral.
Yeah, condolences, by the way, to your uncle, by the way, who was a pillar in Haitian compa music, by the way.
Yes, definitely, absolutely.
Uncle Belizaire, who passed away, man.
Thank you.
About that, Paul.
But what I want to talk to you about is that how all of this discourse is a fuel for the same fascism these neoliberals are saying they're afraid of dealing with the rise of Trumpism.
but it is a fuel because, Pascal, in the age of Trumpism, what you have is a glorification of the self and identity, and the commodification of identity as the means to generate economic gain, as a means to generate profit. Remember, this shift from industrialism to post-industrialism is also a shift in how capital is accumulated. Whereas now capital is accumulated through a commodification of the self and the commodification of identity, there is a need to reify racial identities. There is a need to reify sexual identities.
You mean because Amazon and the Ford Foundation will cut you checks?
Absolutely. Checks are cut to not only are checks cut to leaders of these reified identity folks, but also profit is generated via the market. Remember, there are commercials now that are earmarked for same gender, transgender, Black people, mixed race people. There is this commodification of identity and a celebration of the self that promotes, and this is why the neoliberal left needs identity politics. They need critical race theory because it is a reification of this is how Black folks approach issues. You can market to this. Think about it, Pascal.
It's practical politics because
they
have a more racial diverse coalition. So since the only thing they can promise is more Black and brown people on the chairs of the Death Star.
Absolutely. This is post-industrial capitalism. This does not happen in an industrial-based economy. In an industrial-based economy where the emphasis is on the nuclear family, as the Frankfurt School points out, it is on the reproduction of the nuclear family. It is on father going to work, bringing home money, blah, 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 etc. You don't have that in post-industrial capitalism because the intent is not on reproducing the nuclear family. You have all sorts of families.
I was just reading an article that Torre posted, and we were talking about the despair of poor white Americans from the Atlantic, which talks about all of the urban pathologies, brother, that were told by Moynihan that were going to plague Black America after the Civil Rights Movement are all befalling the white poor all over the country. So were they culturally defective or were they genetically defective, as Charles Murray would say? Well, Murray might argue that they were. But what people like Jordan Peterson exist to do is to take those poor, disaffected whites who've been crushed by the 50-year counter-revolution and neoliberalism and tell them, oh, it's the cultural Marxist.
Yeah, of course.
It's the failure to celebrate the divine magicness of the man and masculinity. It's the chaos of feminism that is done this, when in reality, the political economy of capitalism included all of these identities because they realized they needed to profit from them to increase the marketization of identity as a means of reifying capital, which is good for capitalism, as you've argued.
And think about it, you remove critical race theory from the black elites, Mark, Lamont Hill, all of them. What do you have left to address the black underclass? You have nothing left. And they see the class, right? And it's actually paradoxical, because if the right is successful in ridding itself of critical race theory in the public sphere, you are then left with the masses of people who now stand against the elites and are looking at, okay, we don't have race to talk about anymore. We don't have gender to talk about. We have this racial democracy. The only thing left, Pascal, is classism, the structural differentiation of capitalist relations of production. The right is actually hanging themselves. By attacking critical race theory, you also are attacking somewhat capitalism, because when the elites are no longer left with the black elites are no longer left with critical race theory, the black masses now must confront the class differentiation within their own community.
And this is already happening because this is the discourse we're seeing online. This is why you're having people talking about the Boule Negroes.
Yes, absolutely.
That discourse was not when during the last 50-year counter-revolution have you seen, and I'm not talking about black elites and intellectuals, regular ass black folk challenge class hierarchies, even though they're doing it very clumsily, without intellectual clarity or good politics.
Yes,
absolutely. When have you seen? Shout out to Black Agenda Report for popularizing the critique of the black political class, some call the black misleadership class. When you have articles in the New Yorker now, we have young black people talking about the failures of the black political class. What is happening, and this is basically the theme of my book, Fracture from Obama to Trump and the Crisis of Black Politics, is that the failures of capitalism in the age of the 50-year counter-revolution, particularly with heightened neoliberalism, to address the contradictions of race, class, and capital in America, are forcing the contradictions to become so sharp that the unified notion of black political participation is up for grabs.
Yes, now. Absolutely.
You got some black men talking about, oh, I like Trump. Reactionary politics.
Reactionary politics. Absolutely.
Reactionary politics and nativism is taking hold. And now the whole notion of racial ventriloquists is up for question. Do you see the comment section of Mark Lamont Hill's videos, man? Negroes were killing that guy.
They were killing him. And rightly so, Pascal. Because now what you find, because think about it, look at the amount of black folks who voted for Trump, black males in particular who voted for Trump.
It was small, but the thing is, though, why is the guy who's supposed to be Hitler and Goebbels combined
exactly
from black men?
That's because there was this emphasis on hyper masculinity, because this notion of the identity politics folks are taking over, and it's an attack on black masculinity.
This is a conversation we want to have in this show that no one is talking about. How the crisis of masculinity is fueling the reactionary right in America.
Absolutely.
And it's cross-racial.
I think we had a good first hour. Man, we went a little longer.
Fast.
We went a little longer than I thought we were going to go. But I'm very happy with the way the show went. Pascal, how are you feeling?
Feeling good, man. I hope we did we not talk enough about critical race theory, or did we hit it?
There's some people that wanted there was a person that wanted you to get into your some of your theories from your article. They actually read it.
Okay.
But when you hear the music, that means the show is over, much like the Grammys. Thank you, Dr. Paul C. Mocombe. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Condolences to you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to talk some more shit with us in the second half. It's just patrons only, so you can feel a lot more comfortable with getting even looser. Because Pascal can't wait. Because are you enjoying yourself, Pascal?
This is all great for me, man. This is good stuff.
We haven't had an episode this popular since Finkelstein was on.
Yeah.
Oh, I watched that one. He went off. I watched that one.
This is like a more positive vibe in the chat. That was some fun, hilarious shit. Thank you guys for checking it out. If you haven't done it already, become a patron. If you haven't done it already, please hit subscribe so you can get alerted whenever these videos happen. On that note, we are out.